What's up, guys? Welcome into Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, previewing Week 3 in PLL Lacrosse in Philadelphia this upcoming weekend. Later on in segment 2 of Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, I'll be joined by Hutton Jackson to get into some Week 3 PLL betting for the weekend. But to lead things off here, heading into Week 3, I'm joined here in segment 1 by PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca. Paul, thanks for taking some time with me.
Stevie, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Week 3 is looking pretty interesting for fantasy, so I'm excited to dive in, talk a little bit about it. Excited to talk about some of the trends that I've been seeing, and just talk shop about fantasy lacrosse.
Absolutely. So to jump right into this episode, what are some of your maybe best at each position? I know we kind of talked off the air briefly about that. You did that as an article back in, I believe it was week 1 of PLL Fantasy. So kind of getting into some of your maybe best at each position for heading into week 3.
Mhm. Well, I think starting off with the face-off position this weekend, I'm really interested to see how Mike Sisselberger does. He had a pretty off weekend last week going against the Denver Outlaws. He only scored 1.5 fantasy points, if I believe. He had that rough skid in the fourth quarter and overtime that ultimately lost the Archers that game. So I'm looking to see him bounce back. He's going against Carolina Chaos, who has one of the lower face-off percentages in the league. I think, excluding the Philadelphia Water Dogs, they're sitting at, I think, the second worst face-off percentage. So I think Sisselberger could have a really big week this week. Really interested to see how Michael Sowers does. He's got a back-to-back schedule since Water Dogs are playing in their homecoming weekend. I'm interested to see how he does against Whip Snakes defense, who's really struggling right now. They're 0-2. They've been having goalie issues. I don't think I think their rope unit has also been struggling a lot with losing, the best at the best long stick to ever play the position of Michael Earhart, along with a couple other short stick D minis and Ty Warner and Connor Kerr. So I think that defense is very easy to score. Or is one of the easier defenses that teams have been able to score on. So seeing how he performs on Sunday, and he's got to play Boston on Saturday. The other big thing I'm also looking at is Boston Cannons are playing the Water Dogs' first game of the slate tomorrow. It was noted that the Water Dogs are still not picking up a face-off guy, regardless of what happened in the Week 1 outcome. We saw them that, I don't know if you remember the game, but the Archers went on a huge, I think, 7-0 run to start the game, and they were winning every single face-off. And people thought, wow, this should be the time. The Water Dogs might pick up a face-off guy. They had the bye week last weekend now, going into 2 games. Might be smart to take the load off some of the guys in your short stick defensive midfield group to, keep them healthy and rested instead of them taking the face-offs the entire game. But they're going with their old game plan. I want to see how Zach Tucci does. I put him in my start-sit column just because if he's not going against a traditional face-off specialist and he's just going against a short-stick defensive midfielder, he should be able to rack up a lot of points. So I think those are some of the big areas that I'm interested in this weekend.
Nice. And then one thing that you mentioned kind of in your opening statement to the episode, you talked about maybe some trends we can get into with this segment. I'm interested to get some of your thoughts on that. What are some trends through these first few weekends of games? Obviously, teams like the Atlas and the Chaos have played a few more games than maybe a team like the Redwoods or the Water Dogs. But maybe even to this early stage in the season, what are some trends that you've been noticing?
So fantasy perspective, a big trend that I looked at last week was how goalies performed. I looked at all the goalie slates and how they performed win or loss. Each goalie was able to put up at least 30 fantasy points. And this was regardless of what their salary cap was. I believe Owen McElroy had the lowest salary cap at 2 coins, and he was still I don't know if he got the starter, he got subbed in for Sean Scanoni, but he was able to put up at least 30 fantasy points. Austin Cow put up tied for most with Colin Kurse for the most fantasy points by a goalie. And then you also have players like Brett Dobson, who is has a lot, like his salary cap holds really high right now. So I was interested to see how the salary caps would come out this week for the goalies, and I saw that Dylan Ward has the lowest salary cap hit right now. He's in the low 20s for his hit. or for his coin measure. So I think that a guy like him, a veteran goalie that's been playing a while, was on a championship roster just 2 years ago, already solidified himself as one of the best goalies in the league. You know, what about taking a chance if he's going to be at a low salary cap hit and then seeing if he can still perform above 30 plus points? Because that's what you really want in your goalie. Like, the goalie's going to make a lot of stops. It's very rare that there's going to be a game that they make almost no stops, because when that does happen, it's very quick for a team to sub their goalie out, and they're done for the game within the first half. So I'm interested to see how Dylan Ward holds up these next two games, being the goalie with the lowest salary cap. I'm interested to see how many people really take him and use that kind of strategy if they want to gamble that a low salary cap goalie is going to produce just as many points as a high salary cap goalie.
Talking with PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca here on Taking the Field with Stevie Max. So we talked a little bit about maybe some of the matchups where certain guys, you talked about Michael Sowers, I think it was at the top of this segment, and sort of the opportunity that he has this weekend with those two games. You said you're interested to see how he handles that back-to-back this weekend. But one thing I want to ask you now is, you put out an article just the other day with your stardoms and situms for this weekend. You mentioned one earlier on this segment, but for anybody that maybe hasn't read that article just yet, and I encourage any of you to do so if you haven't already, but for anybody that hasn't, maybe kind of give us a quick rundown of that.
For my start sit column this week for Philadelphia, I had three guys that I was interested to see. I already talked about a couple of them. My three starts were Zach Tucci, like I spoke about before, Doc Sakin, a midfielder for the Atlas, and then also Dylan Ward, just because of his low salary cap hold. Three sit guys I had for this weekend were Trevor Baptiste, Mike Chanichuk, and Matt Cavanaugh. Looking into the Baptiste thing, I think people, if they had read the article, might have taken a second glare at it. Now, I said it right away. I truly believe Trevor Baptiste is the best face-off specialist in the league, if not of all time. The only reason that I put him in my sit column for this weekend is because of how high his salary cap hit right now is at 39 coins, and the matchup he's going against. He's going against, in my opinion, the second best face-off specialist in the league in T.D. Erlin. And I put out a Twitter thread, I don't know if you saw it, Stevie, but it was their head-to-head over the past four games they played each other, which spans back to TD's first year in the league in 2021. Two out of those four games, TD was able to go above 50% against Baptiste, which I don't think any other face-off specialist in the league has been able to do that at least twice in their career. So, I'm really interested to see how this matchup plays out, especially with a guy that's underplayed, or the guy that I spoke about in my article coming out later today, Tyler Carpenter, who was able to put up the most fantasy points out of any defensive player with 49 fantasy points. So I think, how much of a factor is he going to be in the game if the face-offs become a tie-up and it becomes a ground ball scrum a lot of the chances. So, seeing how this matchup plays out, but I was a little skeptical in putting Trevor Baptiste more in a start than rather in my sit. So I ultimately put him in my sit column.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I completely agreed with your take in that article on Baptiste, but I think it's kind of like you said. It's one of those things where you almost see him as kind of being an every week guy in fantasy lineup. You almost build your lineup at times, it seems, or maybe that's just me, but you almost build your lineup, it seems, around him and the ability to have him at that face-off position. But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the matchup in this case does play a huge factor in that, and it's one of those things where you kind of mentioned his ability, that being T.D. Erlin, to go over 50% more than once in his career so far against Trevor Baptiste. It kind of reminds me back to the first year of the PLL when they talked to Joe Nardella, and it was after the second year actually, where he had this huge season, I believe led the league that year in face-off percentage, and he said he attributed a lot to going back to the first year and watching all of his reps against Baptiste and just studying those and figuring out ways that he could get better, because he figured if I can figure out how to beat him, I can probably beat just about anybody in this league. So I think that that's at least kind of what came to mind when you brought that up. But last question for you here, again, talking with PLL fantasy expert Paul Lamonaca on Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. Last question for you is, you do put out on Twitter for each game certain guys to watch for from a fantasy perspective in those particular games. Who are some of the, or I guess what would be like the one matchup where you see the most fantasy value coming from?
California's defense to prevent the Atlas attack if they're able to stop them. Because I think California has a pretty solid defense, not as strong as it was in previous years, but they were able to hold Carolina to 12 goals last week. But if they're able to find a way to prevent this, the most lethal attack in the league to not be as dominant as they've usually been, is that the way to stop the Atlas? Because right now their entire team is being run through their attack, which deservedly so. They have, three very talented players, and then on top of that, you have a pretty deep midfield who's hard-nosed, dodging, an amazing face-off specialist. You have a goalie that's standing on his head all the time. You have an attack that can score almost like on demand. So, seeing if they're able to stop this attack unit along with the entire offense, and if TD Erlin's able to put up a good fight against Trevor Baptiste, is this the way that the Atlas could be stopped this season? It's going to be, I think, a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think that was the matchup that I kind of had highlighted for this topic as well, just because, kind of like you said, the Atlas offense is super deep. Everybody is getting involved there. Jeff Teet's doing a really good job of quarterbacking that offense, but I think as well you look at guys like Ryder Garnsey, Rob Pennell, the list goes on there for the Redwoods on the opposite side. You look at even the goalie matchup between Kelly and Troutner there going on either side. So I do think that that's probably the game for me, and it sounds like you would agree, that has the most fantasy potential here this weekend. So we've got one more segment to get to here on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. As mentioned at the top of the show, I'll be joined in segment 2 by Hutton Jackson to talk some PLL fantasy. But Paul, thanks again for taking the time with me here in segment 1.
Thank you, Stevie. I appreciate it.
All right, welcome back in segment 2 on a Friday for Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, previewing week 3 in PLL action as promised heading into that break. Joined now here in segment 2 by Hutton Jackson to talk some PLL betting for week 3. Hutton, thanks for taking a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, happy to join the podcast, and I appreciate you reaching out to me.
So one thing I want to start out with, we will dive into week 3 and get some of your thoughts on week 3 from a betting perspective here in a second. But one thing I wanted to kind of start with was for maybe somebody that hasn't bet on PLL games before, or maybe hasn't really bet in general, but has maybe thought about kind of diving into it a little bit, what maybe would be like a piece of advice or anything that you would have for somebody that was maybe looking to get into it a little bit?
Yeah, I think the big piece is there's a lot of parity in this league. So, really any team can win on any given day. And I think there tends to be a tendency when you're first getting into it to be a little bit more maybe, cautious about betting teams as, 1.5 point favorites or on the money line, just given the fact that these teams are so tight. So I think when a new bettor starts getting in, they might see, okay, I think let's say this weekend, I think the Redwoods could beat the Atlas maybe. If you think that and they're a 2.5 point favorite, maybe your tendency is to be like, all right, I'm going to bet them at plus 2.5 or whatever. But I think, especially more actually maybe a better example is with the 1.5s. Maybe let's say Utah, Carolina this weekend. If you think Carolina is going to win, don't bet them at heavy juice plus, at the plus 1.5. I would actually just bet them on the money line if you feel that way. And then vice versa. If you like a team to win outright and they're a favorite, the tendency might be to, again, lay a lot of juice to, bet them on the money line, but bet them at minus 1.5. And I think that's a good litmus test, too, for, if you're, let's say you really like the Chaos and you're like, I think the Chaos could beat the Archers, but I'm not sure if they're going to, win. I think it's going to be close or whatever. Maybe that means you stay off if you don't like them, betting them on the money line. Same thing with, maybe a heavy favorite let's say you like the Water Dogs against the Cannons. That spreads a little bit closer, but if you like the Water Dogs, don't necessarily bet them on the money line. Bet them to cover that minus 1.5. And if you don't think they're going to cover that minus 1.5, that's probably a good time to just stay away from that game. So I think that's a good way to with the teams are so close that if you think that a team is going to win, I think it's sometimes better to just lay less juice, bet less to win more, just because, if you feel that confident, then sure, there might be a chance where, they would have covered the 1.5 and they lose by one. But I think that's more rare than actually it seems in this league. We do get a lot of 1-point games, but, a good example is just the Outlaws versus the Archers. I mean, they were a 2.5-point underdog, but, if you like the Outlaws, you could have bet them at plus 2.5, sure, and, that would have covered still. But you could have bet them on the money line and you would have won outright as well. So I think it's just, you can kind of live with, I think, there's going to be some times where they'll cover and they won't win outright, but I think those are more rare. And I think in the long term, you're actually setting yourself up for more success by not laying the juice. When I see a 1.5-point underdog that you have to lay minus 160 to bet them plus 1.5, that's where I really think you should stay away. Or even, minus 140, I think is a lot. At that point, you're probably getting plus money on them on the money line. Just risk that extra point a little bit. But, I think that's where people can kind of get into trouble, is just laying a lot of juice, when betting these teams. And there is so much parity that the odds are that if they're an underdog, they probably are going to win outright if they're going to cover. So I think that's something that new bettors should just look out for. I mean, that, comes down to personal preference, but that's my preference. I'd rather risk, maybe losing it by the hook, over, still getting a better price at betting a team. It's just, I feel like, especially with the Atlas, don't bet the Atlas on the money line. They're going to be heavy favorites week in, week out. If you like the Atlas a lot against the Redwoods this weekend, lay the minus 2.5. And if you don't, then just pass on the game. You don't have to have action on every game. So I think that's a good, beginner's tip for people that are first getting into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that last point that you made there right at the end was maybe probably the biggest thing. What you said is you don't have to put something on every game. I think that's something definitely important to remember. Obviously, if you're just getting into it kind of thing and you're not really sure what you're doing, obviously it's good to be smart. And understanding, like you said, you don't have to do something with every game, so being smart in that regard. So you kind of touched a little bit on it with that first question, but just kind of give us some of your picks from this weekend. I know you said off air that you didn't have kind of your full lineup of picks yet for the weekend, but at least at this point in time, what you have so far.
Yeah, so I haven't dove into the props too much. I will say with the props is the way I like to look at them off the bat is I like to look at how many times a player has gone over that number in the past year, or just at least take a 10-game sample size. If you do it this season, it's too small of a sample size. But if you look at previous years, see how much, let's say, Michael Sowers is, 3.5 points is his line. See how many times he's gone over that. And then Action Network, but a lot of other sites have a calculator where you can actually put in, the percentage that he's gone over. So let's say he's gone over, 5 out of 10 times in a game. That's 50%. You're going to get, your fair odds on that would be plus 100. Now, you don't just blindly bet based on whether, if you're getting plus 125 on that, it should be plus 100. You got to consider the matchup too. So that's where my starting point is. And then I'll actually look at okay, do I like him in this matchup, against the Cannons defense? Do I like, the opportunities that he's going to have? That's where I kind of that's my starting point. So it's not the end all be all, but it's a good way to kind of see what is the sports books what price are they giving us? Is it a fair price? Because maybe Michael Sowers does go over that 3.5 in half of his games, but maybe they're making you lay minus 150, and I don't want to lay that if it should be closer to plus 100, even considering the matchup. So that's kind of the way I approach props. But yeah, I don't have any props right now. I will in my articles that are coming out either later today or Saturday morning. But I do like Cannons and Water Dogs to go over 25.5. I think you can get that number at any book right now, probably around minus 110, minus 115 is what the juice is right now. But I'm still not sold completely on the Cannons defense. They looked much better, this past week against the Whip Snakes. But I think they're going to have a tough test against this Water Dogs offense that has a lot of offensive pieces. Then on the flip side, the Water Dogs are without Chris Sabia. Dylan Ward didn't look too great in that first game. I think, we'll see a better showing from him. But I just think these teams, they like to push in transition. There's not going to be the whole cat and mouse game with the face-off. If can't start Zach Tucci, obviously they'll have a little bit of an advantage at the face-off. But I still don't think it's going to be like a cat and mouse game like you saw with the Archers and stuff. So I really like this game to go over. I just think the pace is going to be there. I think both offenses are extremely efficient. I mean, the Cannons are one of the most efficient offenses in the league. You see, they were trailing the Whipsnakes last week 6-4, probably because they didn't have that many quality possessions, and came back and played lights out. So even though that game didn't go over, I think I liked what I saw from that Cannons offense, and I just think that both defenses are going to struggle a little bit. So that's, I think, my favorite bet. Also, kind of like Archers -1.5 too. It kind of goes back to, I think the Archers are going to win this game, so I'd rather bet them to cover their spread as well. I know they've historically struggled against Chaos, but I have not seen enough from this Chaos offense to lead me to believe that they can kind of hang with this Archers offense. I think Chaos have the pieces. They're going to figure it out one game. I just don't think it is this game. Just too many unforced errors, a lot of turnovers, even in their 2 wins. Josh Byrne is getting more involved. He was more involved in that second game, or that second and third game, than he was in that first game. His shots are going to fall, but I just think missing Dane Smith on the other side is pretty significant loss, and it's kind of going to take Chaos a little bit of time. So the Chaos are a team that I definitely want to. I think they're going to make the playoffs. I think they have a lot of potential, especially when Blaze comes back, which could be this weekend. But I just think right now this offense is not figured it out enough yet against this Archers defense that is looking pretty good. Obviously, they had that collapse against Denver, but I feel like that was kind of fluky. I don't think they did a good job on O'Neal at all. I mean, I would have denied him the ball, and that game probably would have ended a little bit differently. Not to say that Brian O'Neal didn't play phenomenal, and not to take away anything from him, but I don't think we'll see another collapse like that against this Chaos offense.
Yeah, and you talked about that sort of Archers collapse. I talked about that in the previous episode back on Monday, and kind of like you said, it's surprising that they didn't try to even just shut him off or anything like that. I even said in that episode, like, they knew exactly where the ball was going, and even still, like, they still basically had no answer for him, which I found very surprising with that defense and with considering the goalie in the cage as well. So just a very surprising collapse for them. And really, that was 2 weekends in a row, in my opinion, that we saw them kind of collapse. Week 1 came really close to doing it, and then week 2 just kind of went full meltdown there against Denver. So we kind of got some of your thoughts for this weekend in particular. Now kind of want to take a look maybe ahead into the future, talk about some championship odds, MVP odds, Rookie of the Year, anything that you might have with any of those.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is the best week to kind of bet, championship futures or even MVP or Rookie of the Year. I would say if you haven't bet any championship futures, I still kind of like the price for the Cannons. I'm not completely sold on that defense. I really think Keelty is a huge loss for them, and I wasn't sure how much that would affect them, but I think it has a little bit. You even heard Coach Holman talk about it after they won that second game, how it did shake them a little bit in that first game not having Keelty. But the Cannons are a team. I just think they're going to be in the mix. Archers are another one. I don't think we're going to see that many collapses like we did against Denver. So those are the 2 teams that right now, Atlas obviously are the favorites for a reason, and I have futures now on Archers, Cannons, and Atlas. I bought into the Atlas last week at +400. And then I got into Archers Cannons at the beginning of the season. But Archers Cannons haven't moved that much from what their opening odds were. So that's where I think now's the time to buy them. Although I don't hate Atlas either, even though I think the number is really short right now. You're kind of buying them at a premium. I do think they'll beat the Redwoods this weekend, so that number could get even shorter. So that's something to consider. But those are the 3 teams right now that I'd be looking to buy championship futures on. You can make a case for really any team, and especially at these long odds. If you're high on the Redwoods, they've only played 1 game. The fact that they have the longest odds at some books, I think they're +1,400 maybe somewhere, or maybe not that far, but +1,200. You can get a really good price on them. You probably won't get a better price on them if they end up winning this weekend. So, if you like them this weekend, that would be a team to buy in, especially since you've only seen 1 game sample size. Outlaws are a team, they've only played 2 games. I'm not too high on them long term, but I think they will be better than they were last year. But they're a team I would not touch this weekend because I don't see their odds getting any shorter since they're not playing this weekend. I think they can only get longer. Some teams like, really stand out like the Redwoods or like the Whip Snakes. Let's say both those teams get a win, you'll probably see the Outlaws get longer odds, and if those teams lose, you're probably not going to see the Outlaws odds get that much shorter anyway. So I wouldn't bet them right now. But that I think is really just, again, it's about the strategy of knowing like when's the spot to buy into a team, and I think you can look at that too with the MVP market. If you got Jeff Teat at plus 600 or whatever it was at the beginning of the season, you're sitting pretty right now because he looks like the MVP favorite. I would not bet him right now at minus 150, or I think it's minus 110, minus 115, maybe at as long as that at some books. Like, that's an insane price, even though he's played 3 games and he's looked phenomenal. That's an insane price to bet him right now. Honestly, like, let's say he goes off again this weekend and next weekend, like, are his odds going to be that much shorter? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's minus 200 in 2 weeks, and he is the clear-cut favorite. But then you have 5 games of data to go off of, and I think minus 200 on Jeff T in 2 weeks, if he looks like the MVP still in 2 weeks, is a way better bet than minus 150 or minus 115 right now. So that's where it's like, know like when to bet. Know like the season's still very young. Like, if you ask me who I think is going to win MVP at the end of the season right now, I'd say Jeff Teat. But I don't think the odds are conducive of betting him right now. I think there's a lot of value on other guys on the board, and that's where it's like, if if the price is too short on Jeff Teat, the price is probably too long on some other guys. I have futures on Schreiber, Nolting, and Byrne. Really like Nolting, how he looked last week. Those guys are, Schreiber's 1,800, Nolting's plus 2,000, Josh Byrne's plus 2,500. Like, those are guys right now that I think those odds are pretty good if you haven't bet them yet. Just given the fact that, with Blaze being out, Josh Byrne might end up being the best candidate from this Chaos team for MVP. Again, he's one that I wouldn't like throw a lot on just because I don't know how far the Chaos are going to go. Or how well they'll do this season. But, like I said, I like the Cannons a lot. Nolting's the MVP, I think, for them. Like, I know Holman had a great case last year. I think it's going to take a lot for Holman to, like, pass Nolting in the MVP race. But, maybe that's a reason to not bet either of them if you are kind of, think it's a toss-up between them. But, Archers, it's like, it's going to be Schreiber. I know Dobson looked great week 1. I just still think Schreiber is going to be that guy. And then, it's the same thing with, I think, Brennan O'Neill. Unfortunately, his odds got way shorter after that game. But you could have gotten him 150 to 1 last week, which I did take. So if you have that, like, I think you're feeling great. If you don't have that, I wouldn't bet him right now because, again, it's the same thing with the Outlaws' future odds. Like, I don't think his odds are going to get that much shorter after this weekend. I think they can only get longer. So, it's all about buying the dips and selling the highs, I guess, with these markets.
Yeah, and I do remember going back to Jeff Teat for the MVP conversation with that after week 1. I remember you actually had, I believe it was you tweeted out that you were surprised how drastic his odds moved after just those first 2 games because, like you said, it's just such a small sample size. So even though he had like the 11-point game or whatever it was that first game, I mean, just seeing that kind of drastic shift after just 2 games like that was pretty surprising. But I think as things move along, kind of like what you said, I think things will kind of level out, and I think all things will kind of be even at that point. So it'll be really interesting. As like you said, the Redwoods have only played the 1 game so far, so obviously as their season kind of moves along, maybe some of their guys kind of move up that list a little bit as they get going, because I mean, obviously they have guys like Ryder Garnsey, Rob Pinnell, you kind of run down the list, so maybe those guys kind of move up that list a little bit. But just to kind of round out this segment, I said that I wanted to give you maybe a couple of some of my picks that I just kind of quickly looked at through DraftKings, and I think one that kind of stood out to me that I thought could be kind of fun was in the last game, Maryland against Philly to finish out the weekend in Philly. You can get over, under 1.5 2-pointers in that game. And I don't know, I kind of like the over in that, but I'd be interested to see what you had to say about that.
Yeah, what are the odds to the over? Because I'd lean over, but is it let me take a look real quick. Yeah, so with that one, like, that's where it's like it's tricky. So it's I think there probably will be two or more 2-pointers in that game. but the juice is like minus 185, and to me it's just it's two-pointers are such a crapshoot that I kind of look for like the plus money plays for the two-pointers. Now, not always. Like again, I don't want people to mistake like plus money as having value, because sometimes you can find value on minus 185. And I would say that with a lot with like props. Like if Michael Sowers goes over 2.5 goals in 7 of 10 games, and they're giving you minus 125, like that should probably be minus 200. So that's actually a lot of value there, even though it's not at plus money. So don't get into the trap thinking like plus money is always going to be where the value is. But I think with 2-point goals, it's such a crapshoot. Like both those teams have guys that can shoot 2-pointers. So I don't hate betting the over. I think that would be the side I would pick. I just think minus 185 is a lot to lay for that. So I would stay off personally just because of the odds. But if you ask me, it's kind of like Jeff Teague conversation. Like, do I think Jeff Teague's going to win the MVP? Yes. Would I bet him at these odds? No. So that's kind of my thing with this. I think there'll be 2 or more 2-pointers in this game. But at this juice, you might be better off just betting the over if you think there's going to be more than 2 or more than 1. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of an interesting way to look at it, is just kind of taking the over, because you figure if there are, let's say, 2 or more in that game, that's already 4 right there. And that these are teams that they can spread the ball around really well. Water Dogs have a lot of guys that can kind of stretch the field a little bit. Whip Snakes have some guys that can stretch the field a little bit. So yeah, I definitely think that that's kind of an interesting way to look at that. But yeah, I think that overall this was a really good kind of deep dive into some of the weekend's action and maybe kind of taking a little bit of a look ahead. That was Hutton Jackson talking PLL Week 3 bets, and this has been Taking the Field with Stevie Mack.